Number 5. Gacy's clown paintings. John Wayne Gacy was the notorious serial killer operating out of Chicago from the late 60s until the late 70s. He would lure victims into his home with the promise of illicit substances. He would then trick the young men into putting on a pair of handcuffs, claiming that he was going to demonstrate a magic trick. He would then force himself on them, them, and finally asphyxiate them before hiding their remains in his crawl space. In the 11 years that he operated, he was responsible for the deaths of over 33 people before he was arrested on December 21st, 1978, and sentenced to execution by lethal injection. Gacy had appeared for years to be the perfect family man, being an active member of his community, and in a detail that the media became obsessed with, volunteering as a clown who would perform at parades, fundraisers, and children's hospitals. This was unrelated to his crimes, but was such an odd detail that the press dubbed him the Killer Clown. This apparently served as the inspiration for Stephen King's It, and since then, clowns just haven't been able to catch a break. While awaiting his fate on death row, Gacy took up painting, creating self-portraits featuring himself dressed as Pogo the Clown. He is believed to have created over 2,000 paintings in prison before his death in 1994. After this, his attorney auctioned the paintings off, with several of them being purchased and burned in a bonfire attended by the families of the victims. Of course, this just made the paintings that remained more valuable and rare, and they have been known to show up in auctions where they are purchased for tens of thousands of dollars by people with questionable morals and taste. Speaking of which, Zach Bagans purchased a few of Gacy's paintings and put them on display in his museum in a display case dedicated to the memorabilia related to the Killer Clown. However, despite his best efforts, he was unable to purchase Gacy's brain to add it to the exhibit. Number 4. Peggy the Doll. A staple item in any museum focusing on ghosts and murder is a classic haunted doll. Robert the Doll is a classic, and the whole world has learned about Annabelle at this point. But Zach has a doll on display which he claims puts them all to shame, and her name is Peggy. Peggy's story begins in 2015 when a paranormal investigator named Jane Harris received a call from a distraught woman who claimed to have purchased a doll at a garage sale that was causing her to suffer from a mystery illness and vivid nightmares. The woman locked the doll in her shed until Harris agreed to take the doll away with her. A couple days later, she became sick and unable to get out of bed. She started hearing strange noises and hallucinated while the doll was in the house. Peggy was examined by psychics who claimed that she was possessed by the spirit of a woman born in 1946 who had died of a respiratory illness and attached herself to the doll. Harris uploaded a video of the doll online, and almost 100 viewers claimed to have become briefly ill after seeing the video. Zach soon purchased the doll, putting it on display in his museum where guests are asked to sign a waiver before seeing it, absolving him from any liability should the guests experience horrible paranormal activity due to exposure to Peggy. Number 3. The Women from Lem statue. This limestone statue, also known as the Goddess of Death, was discovered in Lem, Cyprus in 1878. Its purpose, or exactly what it was meant to portray, has been lost to time, but many experts believe it may be a fertility statue of an unknown goddess. Whatever the reason for the carving, experts have concluded that it was carved sometime around 3500 BC. After being found in 1878, it was purchased by a man named Lord Elfont. Within 6 years of having acquired the object, Elfont and all 6 of his family members had died under mysterious circumstances. The statue passed to a man named Ivor Manucci, who died along with his entire family within 4 years of the purchase. The same thing happened to its next owner, Lord Thompson Noel, and his family. The statue seemed to disappear for a time before being acquired by Sir Alan Biverbrook, who had a wife, 2 daughters, and 2 sons. Yet again, family members began to drop like flies, with Biverbrook, his daughters, and his wife all passing within a few years. Fearing that they would be next, Biverbrook's sons decided to donate the statue to the Royal Museum in Edinburgh, Scotland, where it was soon put on display. However, the statue was not quite done, and the curator who had handled the statue mysteriously died the next year. The statue is still on display to this day, locked in a heavy glass display case. Number 2. Thomas Busby's chair. Our next entry takes us to North Yorkshire in 1702, when 2 criminals, Daniel Audie and his son-in-law, Thomas Busby, came into conflict. They were coin forgers who who essentially ran a criminal empire, but Daniel disapproved of Tom's relationship with his daughter. This resulted in a fight, which ended with Daniel's untimely demise. Thomas was arrested soon afterwards and sentenced to be. There is some variation in what happened next. Some versions of the tale say that Thomas was arrested at his favorite pub, and others say he was allowed back into the bar for his last drink before his death. Whatever the case, before being taken away, he told the other patrons of the pub, "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." He was then taken away and, as the local historian and poet William Grange described it, the bones of the poor wretch who had committed murder to fester in the sunshine and blow in the tempest until they fell piecemeal to earth, and tradition yet tells tales of night wanderers being terrified when passing the dreaded spot. While Thomas began apparently haunting the spot across from the inn where his remains were displayed, the curse he laid on the chair began taking effect. Over the years, many brave souls sat on the chair to prove they were not afraid and paid the price. In 1894, a chimney sweep sat in the chair and was found the next day hanging next to where Busby had been displayed. In 1967, 2 Air Force pilots sat in the chair as a joke, but when they were driving home that night, they crashed into a tree and did not survive. A few years later, a builder sat in the chair and fell off a roof later that same night. Not long after, a cleaner fell into the chair after slipping while mopping the floor and died of a brain tumor soon after. In 1978, the owner of the now renamed Busby Stoop Inn decided that too many deaths had occurred and donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum. Although they didn't technically lock the chair away, they did hang the chair on the wall, 5 feet off the ground, to prevent anyone from sitting on it and receiving Busby's fatal curse. Number 1. The Bassano Vase. Although it has fallen out of favor now, for centuries, a common gift given to brides on the day of their weddings were intricate ornate vases. Our next tale begins in the 15th century Italy and spans over 500 years. Legend says that on the day of her wedding, a bride in a village near Napoli found a gift with no clue which of the guests had given it to her. It was a 4-pound silver vase. She decided to put it in her room for safekeeping before the wedding ceremony. But when the ceremony was due to start, the bride was nowhere to be found. The groom went to her room to look for her and found her lifeless body on the ground with no trace of what had caused the death, other than her desperately clutching the silver vase. The bride was buried and the vase was passed on to one of her family members to be taken care of. Within days, the second member of the family was dead from unknown causes. The vase was given to another member of the family, and when he also passed away, the family made the connection between all the recent tragedies and the Bassano vase. Unsure what to do, they reached out to a local priest who, upon hearing the story, informed them that whoever had given it to the bride had either cursed it or made it from cursed materials. He advised them to bury it on sacred grounds. They dug a hole and wrote a note warning, "Beware. This vase brings death," which they placed inside the cursed vase. The vase was buried and remained underground for the next 500 years. By horrible chance, a man in 1988 was digging and came across the vase. He read the note, but being the skeptical type, discarded it and took the newly found Bassano vase to a local auction house. The vase went up for auction and was sold for the equivalent of $2,270 to the local pharmacist. Within 3 months, the pharmacist was dead, and the vase was sold by his family to a local doctor, who also passed away soon after. The vase developed a reputation after this, and several people who were approached to purchase it refused, but it was eventually bought by an archaeologist who, despite his family's protests, did not believe in curses. He died 3 months later. His family threw the vase out their window, but a police officer who was passing by saw this and tried to return it. The family refused the vase back and told him of its cursed nature. He tried to give it to multiple different museums, but having heard about the curse, they all refused. Fearing for his life, he did what the bride's family had done over 500 years prior and buried it in a lead box in a cemetery. Which cemetery he used is unknown, but let us hope that no unwitting soul rediscovers this cursed vase and unleashes it upon humanity once again.
Number 5 on this list is the Sacred Book of Abramelin the Mage. This book was written by, and yep, you guys guessed it, Abramelin. Abramelin held a belief that every single person had their own unique personal demon within them. Kinda sounds like the guy who's been through a few rough breakups if you ask me. He believed though that even though we all had this personal demon, that it could be tamed and it could be controlled. Sort of like this inner power that you have that once you're capable of controlling, it will be very, very strong. If you have this inner demon tamed, then you'll be able to perform supernatural feats and abilities that the average human won't be able to do. That's basically what this book is all about. taming your inner demon and learning to work with it so that you can harness that power. Then, once you've done so, this book will teach you what sort of powers you're able to perform. Now, this all sounds pretty legendary, actually. I think that everybody would love to be able to channel some magical part of themselves and perform supernatural feats. The book, as with many on this list, though, comes with a downside. If you have this book in your possession, then you're said to be haunted by spirits from another dimension. And these spirits will bring you horrible luck. Maybe if you channel your inner demon quick enough and then get rid of this book, it could be worth it, but something tells me that it's going to take longer than an afternoon to do that, which probably makes this book too dangerous to use. Number 4 on this list is the Arabetel. The Arabetel, or the Arabetel de Magia Veretum, is an ancient text that has some questionable things in it. Although the intentions of this book are good and it may have helped some individuals live a better life, there are dark things in here as well, and the better life can't be said for all people who use this book. Ancient Origins writes, the Arabetel is a Renaissance period grimoire and one of the most influential works of its kind. Unlike some other occult manuscripts that contain dark magic and malicious spells, the Arabetel contains spiritual advice and guidance on how to live an honest and honorable life. The Arabetel is said to have been written in 1575 AD. The author remains unknown, although it has been speculated that it was written by a man named Jacques Gohori. The focus of the Arabetel is on nature and the natural relationships between humanity and a celestial hierarchy. It centers on the positive relationships between the celestial world and humans, and the interaction between the two of them. The Arabetel was an extremely influential work for its time. So as we can see, this ancient text isn't inherently evil in nature, or at least that wasn't its initial intention. However, this book has been connected to some urban legends, and one copy of the text in particular is definitely cursed. It's believed that back in the 1600s, this book fell into the property of a young Polish farmer. The farmer grew obsessed with this book and the dark and malicious spells that it contained. He cursed his rivals and made it so that their crops would never grow. He turned into this evil warlock who the whole region feared. Even though they feared him, they weren't going to give up all hope. The people rose up and attacked this warlock farmer. They killed him, but before he died, he cursed his copy of the Arabetel so that whoever reads it will die within 60 days. Needless to say, the people weren't about to test this guy's curse out, and they hid the copy of the book away. Nowadays, nobody knows where it went, and it could still possibly be out there. So if you do ever pick up one of these texts and give it a read, then you're basically rolling the dice and just hoping that it wasn't that same copy that got cursed.
Number 3 on this list is James Dean's Little Bastard. Now, I'm certainly stretching the definition of ancient history on this one because this story actually takes place in the 50s, but with the amount of lore that surrounds it, I wanted to include it in this video. James Dean was an extremely successful male actor in the 50s and was one of the biggest heartthrobs of the generation. He's critically acclaimed and is potentially one of the best actors to ever play the cool, bad boy roles. Sadly, he was taken far too soon and died in a car accident at the age of 24. The car accident took place in a rural town in California. The accident was a head-on collision that he had in his sports car. This sports car was a silver Porsche 550 Spider, and James Dean affectionately referred to it as his little bastard. This car, although a super cool vehicle, is completely cursed. After Dean died, George Barris, a hot rod designer, purchased what was left of the car with the intention to sell it for parts. When this car was being worked on, it fell and completely crushed the leg of one of the mechanics who was working on it. This is when the potential of a curse started to materialize, but it would grow into so much more. The parts started to get sold and people started to notice a very horrible connection. Anyone who bought parts of this car started to die. The buyer of the engine of the little bastard died shortly after in a fatal car crash. Somebody who bought the tires got in a horrible accident when those same tires just blew out whilst they were on the road. The person who bought the transmission was sent to hospital with critical injuries after getting in a car crash. The truck driver who was moving the car's frame, he got in a horrible accident and he was killed. The amount of death and tragedy that ensued from this car is truly uncanny. The frame of the car that the truck driver was transporting was eventually stolen, and to this day, we don't know where it is. I hope whoever stole it though at least had the foresight not to ever drive with it because the consequences could be dire. Number 2 on this list is the Bassano vase. The Bassano vase is a pretty vase that was made all the way back in the 1500s in Napoli, Italy. The vase isn't ornate in nature, it has a very simplistic silver design. It was initially intended as a wedding present, however, it may just have been the worst wedding present that anyone has ever gifted. That's because this vase is a vase of death. Now I know that sounds dramatic, but it truly brings death to whomsoever comes in contact with it. Its initial run-in with death is when it was given as a wedding gift, and that same night as it was gifted, the bride was murdered in her home while she was holding that vase. Some people believe that her spirit haunts this vase now, or that a spirit of death has always had its clutches on this vase. Either way, it didn't stop with just the bride. At the time, the family didn't realize that the vase had anything to do with the misfortune that had befallen the bride, and they continued to pass the vase down generation to generation. However, it seemed that whomsoever was in possession of this vase would meet an untimely death soon after receiving it. After the family realized what was going on, they boxed the vase up and put a note in it that read, "Beware, this vase brings death." The vase was auctioned off in 1998 though, and the note wasn't included. It sold for $2,250 and it was the worst purchase the buyer ever made. 3 months after buying it, they died. Then 3 more deaths of the following owners were linked to this vase until finally the original family who auctioned it off in the first place demanded that the police take it away. Since then, no one has heard anything from it, which is probably the best thing for everyone. Number 1 on this list is the Crying Boy painting. Once again, stretching the term ancient here a little bit, but it ties into World War II, so I feel like it should be counted. Giovanni Bragolini was a Spanish artist who was famously credited with making a series of paintings of crying children. He made these in the early 1950s and they were meant to symbolize all of the poor children who became orphans due to the brutal fighting in World War II. His initial market was tourists, however these paintings, they started to really take off in Europe and a lot of British families grew fond of them. For years they were nothing more than just a painting until in 1985 when the curse of the crying boy hit the mainstream. Ron and Mary lost their home from a kitchen fire. Even though their entire livelihood burned to the ground, the painting of the crying boy that they had, it lived on. It was the one item to survive from the fire. Ron's brother Peter was a fireman and he said that this wasn't the first time that he saw this. In fact, he believed that he had witnessed the same phenomenon 50 times before. It was then believed that not only were these paintings immune to fire, but the owning of them would inevitably cause a fire in the first place. Mass hysteria ensued and legends started to come out of everywhere in regards to these paintings. People claimed that it caused their family members to die or that it was cursed with the soul of the children it depicted. Either way, this reached unparalleled levels and finally a newspaper, The Sun, said that if people were to ship them their copies of these paintings, they would dispose of them. Over 2,500 copies were sent to this newspaper and they burned all of them in a massive fire. I don't know if it really was the paintings causing these fires or if they were cursed, but chalking it up to a coincidence seems a little bit too good to be true to me. Number 5 on this list is the Untitled Grimoires. The Untitled Grimoires were written by a witch and really not the type of book that you want to be reading before bedtime, or actually reading at all for that matter. Digital Trends says, the Untitled Grimoires is a set of 2 handwritten, spiral-bound spell books sold by an online retailer for nearly $14,000 back in 2013. The books were handwritten in the 1960s by Persephone Adrasta Irene, a high priestess of Wicca who supposedly led her own coven. All 250 pages are filled with incantations, spells, enchantments, and details on how to summon spirits and demons. However, there was a serious catch. The seller warned buyers that any non-believers who messed with the books would bring a deadly curse upon themselves, while Persephone herself explicitly tells readers on the first page that proceeding with the book would have serious consequences. She wrote, "To those not of the craft, the reading of this book is forbidden. Proceed no further, or justice will exact a swift and terrible retribution, and you will surely suffer at the hand of the craft." So literally anyone who can't perform dark magic already can't read this book and learn how to perform dark magic without dark magic coming and cursing them. Seems like a kind of a stupid way to get people to join your club, but I guess I'm not familiar with the ongoings of witches. Either way, there is no doubt that this book is deeply cursed. I can't imagine spending 14 grand on this thing unless you literally were already familiar with dark magic yourself, and I guess then you could make use of the book, but that's not me. People who have tried to read this thing have had some horrible tragedies befall them, so I highly do not recommend it. Number 4 on this list is Pseudomarchia Daemona. Wow, okay, that was an absolute freaking mouthful, so I'm not going to be calling it that anymore because it's also called the False Hierarchy of Demons, and I'm going to be saying that from here on out. Ancient Origins says this is a great compendium from the 16th century dictating the names of 69 demons. The list initially appeared as an appendix to a book about demonology and witchcraft by Johann Weyer. The son of a civic service merchant, Johann Weyer was a Dutch doctor and occult practitioner born in the Netherlands in 1515. Well versed in Latin from a young age, Weyer quickly became a student of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, a famous magician, theologian, and occultist in Antwerp. It appears that Weyer's fascination with magic began while working under Agrippa, but later escalated after he became a doctor in his own right. He was summoned to a particular fortune teller's court case and thereby asked by the judge for advice on the topic. The court case started his interest in researching the witchcraft way of life, culminating with his decision to attempt to defend those who were accused of practicing. 27 years after this case, when Weyer was 62 years old, he published The False Hierarchy of Demons. This book, as with most that study demons, also talks about how to summon and control these demons. This book also focuses a lot on witchcraft too, something that became a deep obsession for Weyer. Definitely a book that you should avoid, and one that could hold some serious curses.
Number 3. Thomas Busby's Chair. Our next entry takes us to North Yorkshire in 1702, when 2 criminals, Daniel Audie and his son-in-law, Thomas Busby, came into conflict. They were coin forgers who essentially ran a criminal empire, but Daniel disapproved of Tom's relationship with his daughter. This resulted in a fight, which ended with Daniel's untimely demise. Thomas was arrested soon afterwards and sentenced to be hanged. There is some variation in what happens next. Some versions of the tale say that Thomas was arrested at his favorite pub, and others say he was allowed back into the bar for his last meal before his death. Whatever the case, before being taken away, he told the other patrons of the pub, "May sudden death come to anyone who dare sit in my chair." He was then taken away and hung across the street. As the local historian and poet William Grange described it, the bones of the poor wretch who had committed murder were hung to fester in the sunshine and blow in the tempest until they fell piecemeal to the earth, and tradition yet tells tales of night wanderers being terrified when passing this dreaded spot. While Thomas began apparently haunting the spot across from the inn where his remains were displayed, the curse he laid on the chair began taking effect. Over the years, many brave souls sat on the chair to prove that they were not afraid, and they paid the price. In 1894, a chimney sweep sat in the chair and was found the next day hanging next to where Busby had been displayed. In 1967, 2 Air Force pilots sat in the chair as a joke, but when they were driving home that night, they crashed into a tree and they did not survive. A few years later, a builder sat in the chair and fell off of a roof later that same night. Not long after, a cleaner fell into the chair after slipping while mopping the floor and died of a brain tumor soon after. In 1978, the owner of the now renamed Busby Stoop Inn decided that too many deaths had occurred and donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum. Although they didn't technically lock the chair away, they did hang the chair on the wall, 5 feet off of the ground, to prevent anyone from sitting on it and receiving Busby's fatal curse. Number 2. The Bassano Vase. Although it has fallen out of favor now, for centuries a common gift given to brides on the day of their wedding was an intricate ornate vase. Our next tale begins in 15th century Italy and spans over 500 years. Legend says that on the day of her wedding, a bride in a village near Napoli found a gift with no clue which of the guests had given it to her. It was a 4-pound silver vase. She decided to put it in her room for safekeeping before the wedding ceremony, but when the ceremony was due to start, the bride was nowhere to be found. The groom went to her room to look for her and found her lifeless body on the ground, with no trace of what had caused the death, other than her desperately clutching the silver vase. The bride was buried, and the vase was passed on to one of her family members to be taken care of. Within days, the second member of the family was dead from unknown causes. The vase was given to another member of the family, and when he also passed away, the family made the connection between all the recent tragedies and the Bassano vase. Unsure what to do, they reached out to a local priest, who upon hearing the story informed them that whoever had given it to the bride had either cursed it or made it from cursed materials. He advised them to bury it on sacred ground. They dug a hole and wrote a note warning, "Beware. This vase brings death," which they placed inside the cursed vase. The vase was buried and remained underground for the next 500 years. By horrible chance, a man in 1988 was digging and came across the vase. He read the note, but being the skeptical type, discarded it and took the newly found Bassano vase to a local auction house. The vase went up for auction and was sold for the equivalent of $2,270 to a local pharmacist. Within 3 months, the pharmacist was dead, and the vase was sold by his family to a local doctor who also passed away soon after. The vase developed a reputation after this, and several people who were approached to purchase it refused. But it was eventually bought by an archaeologist who, despite his family's protests, did not believe in curses. He died 3 months later. His family threw the vase out their window, but a police officer who was passing by saw this and tried to return it. The family refused the vase back and told him of its cursed nature. He tried to give it to multiple different museums, but having heard about the curse, they all refused. Fearing for his life, he did what the bride's family had done over 500 years prior, and buried it in a lead box in the cemetery. Which cemetery he used is unknown, but let us hope that no unwitting soul rediscovers this cursed vase and unleashes it upon humanity once more. Number 1. Robert, the Evil Doll. We've all heard of the cursed Annabelle doll that has permeated pop culture for the last decade, but have you heard of Robert? Robert was a gift to a young boy of the same name, Robert Eugene Otto, from his grandfather. The grandfather had been traveling in Germany and came across the doll, who was not intended to be a toy, but a window display. He bought the doll for his grandson, who dressed it in a sailor's outfit that he had outgrown, and kept it with him at almost all times. As the young boy grew up, witnesses remember his relationship with the doll seemed to grow more and more unhealthy, with him referring to the doll as a living person, and blaming mishaps on him. The boy, who went by his middle name Gein, grew up to be an eccentric artist in a stately home known as the Artist House. He kept Robert by the upstairs window, where children claimed to see him moving in and out of view. When Gein died in 1974, the new owner of the house, Myrtle Reuter, found the doll and became its new owner. Visitors of the house began reporting the sound of giggling and footsteps coming from the attic, where the doll was being kept. When the doll was around people who spoke ill of its original owner, some claimed that his facial expression seemed to change. After Myrtle got sick of the doll apparently moving around the home by himself and scaring guests for 20 years, she chose to donate Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. Robert now resides in a locked display case to prevent the over 120-year-old doll from decaying further, but also to protect the visitors of the museum. But even those precautions don't always seem to work. Guests who insult Robert at the museum report experiencing tragedy in their lives not long after. This has ranged from people losing their jobs, getting divorced, breaking bones, getting into automobile accidents, and even a few deaths. The doll reportedly receives letters every day from admirers, people wanting the doll to curse their enemies, and a few from people asking Robert to reverse the curse they believed he has laid upon them. With that, number 5. The Anguished Man. The tale of this rather disturbing-looking painting is strange and steeped in mystery, but every scant piece of information we have on it is more unsettling than the last. The painting of a featureless man who seems to be screaming was apparently painted by a deeply troubled artist who mixed his own blood with his paints in an effort to get the right shade of red. Not long after completing it, the artist took his own life, and the painting found its way into a woman's care. She kept it for many years, but claimed that once she put the painting up, her and her family began to see a dark, shadowy figure roaming about their house. At night, they would hear strange sounds like footsteps and crying. The woman took the painting down and kept it locked in her attic for 25 years until she died, leaving the painting to its current caretaker, Sean Robinson. Sean had been warned by his grandmother that the painting was haunted, but he thought little of it. Robinson kept the painting in his basement for about a decade before rediscovering it and putting it up. Once again, the family began seeing the dark, shadowy figure roaming the halls and hearing the sound of weeping and moaning during the night. Sean began leaving a camera on by the painting to try and get evidence of its paranormal nature, and upon reviewing the footage, heard some odd noises and saw evidence of doors doors opening and closing seemingly by themselves, and the painting falling over onto the ground. As time went on, the activity became more and more intense, with his wife seeing a strange mist and an unseen force pushing his son down the stairs. Things went from bad to worse when guests who came to see the painting began reporting intense and sudden nosebleeds. Sean takes the painting out from time to time to show it to paranormal investigators and television programs who want to hear his story, but otherwise, the anguished man is apparently kept locked away in a safe location to prevent any further harm from coming to unwitting people. Number 4. Robert the Evil Doll. We've all heard of the cursed Annabelle doll that has permeated pop culture for the last decade, but have you heard of Robert? Robert was a gift to a young boy of the same name, Robert Eugene Otto, from his grandfather. The grandfather had been traveling in Germany and came across the doll, who was not intended to be a toy, but a window display. He bought the doll for his grandson, who dressed it in a sailor's outfit that he had outgrown and kept it with him at almost all times. As the young boy grew up, witnesses remember his relationship with the doll seemed to grow more and more unhealthy, with him referring to the doll as a living person and blaming mishaps on him. The boy, who went by his middle name, Gein, grew up to be an eccentric artist in a stately home known as the Artist's House. He kept Robert by the upstairs window, where children claimed to see him moving in and out of view. When Gein died in 1974, the new owner of the house, Myrtle Reuter, found the doll and became its new owner. Visitors of the house began reporting the sound of giggling and footsteps coming from the attic where the doll was being kept. When the doll was around people who spoke ill of its original owner, some claim that his facial expression seemed to change. After Myrtle got sick of the doll apparently moving around the home by itself and scaring guests for 20 years, she chose to donate Robert to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. Robert now resides in a locked display case to prevent the over 120-year-old doll from decaying further, but also to protect the visitors of the museum. But even those precautions don't seem to always work. Guests who insult Robert at the museum report experiencing tragedies in their lives not long after. This has ranged from people losing their jobs, getting divorced, breaking bones, getting into automobile accidents, and even a few deaths. The doll reportedly receives letters every day from admirers, people wanting the doll to curse their enemies, and a few from people asking Robert to reverse the curse they believe he has laid upon them.
In at number 3 we have the Great Omar. Some call the Great Omar the most cursed book of all time. Unlike other books in this list that might unleash a curse on the person or people who open it, the curse is often contained. This book, however, has been linked to many great tragedies throughout history. People were captured by the beauty of this book. The beauty of the binding hid the curse from the world and enchanted buyers. The book was embellished with over 1,000 jewels, with 5,000 leathers on lace and 100 square feet of gold leaf. It took the team of craftsmen over 2.5 years to make. Only one was ever made due to the grandeur of the book. When the book was finally completed, it was sold at auction for £1,000 and shipped to New York for display. The book went down on the Titanic and was destroyed. Some say it was due to the book being on board that the ship went down when further misfortunes followed anyone involved. The creator of the book drowned while trying to rescue a woman a few weeks later. His partner decided to recreate the book. Again, this was a long and painful task, costing him a lot of time. Once the second book was created, it was placed in a vault in London. He wanted it to be reserved so that it would not meet the same fate as the first. Unfortunately, the vault and the second creator were both destroyed in the bombings of World War II. Was this a coincidence that both books and creators were destroyed? Some think that an ancient curse latched onto the book on creation. This then passed to the second on creation. Was it due to the story inside? Little is written on the book. People only ever paid attention to the cover. This may have been by design. The company that created the books then passed on to one of the previous owner's nephews. After his retirement, he decided to do a personal project and recreate the book. This copy lives in the British Library to this day. I would not risk attempting to touch or read it though. Its past seems like a clear warning. In at number 2 we have the Grand Grimoire. The Grand Grimoire is also nicknamed the Gospel of Satan. It is an occult book written by a man in the 15th century. Little is known about the man who wrote the book, but he is believed to have been possessed by the devil. On completion of the book, the devil passed from him into the book. The book is known to be cursed by the devil. You're advised to not attempt to read this book. A grimoire is a book of spells. The particular spells in the book are dark and twisted. Often some form of sacrifice is needed to complete any of the spells. You would need to be willing to perform some truly evil acts if you wanted to be successful successful with these spells. A lot of people look for this book due to its promise to be able to bring loved ones back to life or summon demons. Many people who are grieving loved ones who passed too soon try to use this book to bring them back. This is extremely dangerous, and not only will it may not work, but it might backfire and cause your own demise. This book has such a dark reputation, it has been the most feared book since medieval times. Of course, it goes without saying that you should avoid this book, really any book that promises it can summon demons, as that is usually a big sign that it might be cursed. Catcher in the Rye? What the f***? Everyone's read this book. I'm not possessed. Maybe. And finally, in at number 1, we have The Catcher in the Rye. The Catcher in the Rye is one of the most well-known American books of the 20th century. It is often a required reading for most teens during high school. Despite this, the book has a dark past that often gets overlooked. It was written by J.D. Salinger and first published in 1951. The book is considered to perfectly capture the essence of adolescence. Throughout time and the changes in society is still relatable to teenagers' lives today. It reflects the true nature of being an adolescent, the rebellion, survival, and internal struggles of growing up. Follows the story of a young man named Holden Caulfield. He has been kicked out of a number of schools, and when the story picks up, he has been kicked out of his latest school. He doesn't want to tell his parents, fearing the punishment that might follow. He runs away from home and starts his adventures in New York. At the time of its release, it was seen as controversial for using bad language and adult themes, but the author didn't want to censor the book. He wanted an accurate depiction. None of this is why the book is considered cursed, though. The curse comes from the link the book has to murders. The list of crimes linked to the book is longer than you might expect, one of the most famous being the assassination of John Lennon. His killer sat and read the book until the police arrived. He then used the book to write and sign his confession. He later explained that after reading the book he wanted to save Lennon and maintain his innocence forever. This is not the only famous murder connected to the book. Robert Bardo took the life of actress Rebecca Schaeffer, and John Hinckley assassinated Ronald Reagan. Both were carrying copies of the book while committing their crimes. It is unknown why this curse turns people into killers or how this book became cursed. It appears that it has the power to turn certain readers into criminals. It seems that it does not have the ability to make everyone behave in the same way. Maybe if you read the book at a low point in your life, you'll be susceptible to the curse. So there is a chance you'll read the book and be fine, but there is a risk that it will intercept your mind with the dark thoughts. It seems to make the reader believe they need to cleanse the world. So if you do have to read this, please just be careful.
Number 5 on this list is the Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond is one of the most famous jewels in the history of the world. Its exceptional size and beauty are practically unparalleled. It is 45.52 carats and gives off a beautiful blue hue when it is hit by the light, truly a marvel from the world. This diamond is said to be worth anywhere from 200 to 350 million American dollars. To put that in perspective, if you had this diamond, you could buy your own Hawaiian private island in exchange for it. The earliest records of the diamond go all the way back to 1666 when a French gem merchant purchased it. Since then, it has changed hands many times, ending up in the hands of some royalty and eventually making its way to the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., where it resides today. This diamond may be the most beautiful stone on the entire planet, but one should be careful with it because it's said to hold a curse. Over the years that this diamond has been in circulation, many tragedies have befallen the owners of this stone. An article written by Christy Puchko writes, "Some believe it is cursed, with a whole mythology claiming that great misfortune and misery will befall any who dares to wear the 45.52 carat diamond. Rumored victims of the diamond have suffered disgrace, divorce, suicide, imprisonment, torture, financial ruin, lynching, or decapitation. One was even said to have been ripped apart by dogs and another by a French mob. If these stories are true, then it's no wonder why the legend of a curse has circulated around this diamond. So with all that being said, I want to ask you guys, if somebody offered you this diamond, do you take the risk? On one hand, you could be the owner and the bearer of potentially the most sought after rock on the planet, but on the other hand, you might just be a very expensive dog treat. Let me know what you got down below, diamond or no diamond? Number 4 on this list is Tut's tomb. Now this tomb is the most famous, however this entry could be generalized to any tomb of a pharaoh that is disturbed. If a pharaoh's tomb is disturbed, then you will have activated the pharaoh's curse, and this will befall anyone who enters and disturbs the sleep of these mummified Egyptian royalty. For a long time, hieroglyphs couldn't be deciphered, but in the early 19th century this changed and we were able to read them. On the pyramids of Giza, there is a very specific curse written on the entrance. It reads, All people who enter this tomb who will make evil against this tomb and destroy it, may the crocodile be against them in the water and the snakes against them on land. May the hippopotamus be against them in the water and the scorpion on land. This acts as a pretty clear-cut warning to stay away and not disturb anyone that's inside. I should also note that this rule applies to anyone. We're talking archaeologists, thieves, literally anyone who enters. Your motives for entering don't matter, it's only that you are there. Over the years, this curse has reared its ugly head time and time again. When they first opened the tomb of King Tut, there is a famous story of how Howard Carter, the leader of the team operating the excavation, had a canary, and when it entered the tomb, died at the hands of a cobra. 2 weeks later, the person who financed the whole operation, Lord Carnarvon, was bit by a mosquito and died due to a horrible infection. These are two of the most famous examples, but for centuries, bad luck, sudden illness, and death have been tied to these ancient tombs. Another one of the pharaoh's tombs warns, "They that shall break the seal of this tomb shall meet death by a disease that no doctor can diagnose." I'd say that that's just about as clear-cut as curses come these days.
Coming in at number 3, we have the Book of Abramelin. The book was formed from 12 manuscripts written by a man named Abraham. He wrote the book to pass on his secrets to his son. He told the story of his journey across the Egyptian desert. During his time in the desert, he came across a magical being. The mage taught a powerful form of Kabbalistic magic to Abraham. In return, the mage asked for Abraham to live in fear of the Lord and to serve him. He said he must not live his life in search of riches or have more than he needs. He warned him not to use the magic to obtain any of these things. When Abraham returned home, he wrote the book to ensure he did not lose the knowledge. He wrote powerful incantations, ways to summon otherworldly beings, as well as other powerful spells. His pride started to get the best of him once the book was complete. He decided to only keep this to himself and pass it down to his family. He began to boast of his newfound power. He bragged that he could raise the dead and become invisible at will. Of course, no one in the town believed him. He decided he would show them all. He used minor spells to prove his power. Once they believed him, others came to see him. They offered him great jewels to bring back their loved ones or bring them good fortune. He fell deeper and deeper into his greed. He had broken his oath to the mage. He began to have bad luck and strange things happening around him. He would see spirits from another world and was being haunted by dark entities. It is believed that as he broke his oath, he became cursed. He suddenly passed away in a horrible accident. Since then, anyone who owned the book was haunted and plagued by the curse. Abraham's family never used the book and tried to keep away from the rest of the world. Coming in at number 2, we have The King in Yellow. The King in Yellow is a book of short stories. It was written by writer Robert W. Chambers and first published in 1895. The book was named after a play which has the same name and recurs as a motive throughout some of the stories. The first half of the book contains highly esteemed horror stories. It has been described as a classic in the field of supernatural. There are 10 stories included in the book. The first 4 mention The King in Yellow. The King in Yellow is said to be a forbidden play that drives those who read it into despair and madness. Although these short stories only speak of the forbidden play, it is said that if you were to find the original text, you may be driven mad. It was once performed for a mass audience. The cursed play lured the audience or reader in. By the time you get to the second act, the audience or reader have been driven completely insane. This is why the text is thought to have been destroyed and is forbidden to read. If you do think you have found it, then I warn you to not read it, or you might just be driven mad yourself. I'm already mad, so I can read it. And finally, in at number 1, we have The Sorrows of Young Werther. The Sorrows of Young Werther is a novel written by John Wolfgang von Goethe and published in 1774. Goethe was 24 at the time of writing the book, and it took him only 5.5 weeks of intense writing to finish. It instantly placed him among the foremost international literary celebrities and was among the best known of his work. The majority of the plot focuses on a young man's extreme response to unrequited love. The book had a big cultural impact. It was given the name Werther Fever. Young men throughout Europe began to dress in clothing described in the novel. The obsession started to go a little further than this. Young men started to copy the ending of the book where the main character takes his own life. Copies of the book were found with each copycat passing. Authorities all over Europe were concerned and didn't know what to do. They banned the wearing of the clothing from the book, hoping this would stop the copycats from taking inspiration from the text. It was labeled an epidemic, and governments were desperate to stop the young men from passing. This led to a revision of the book in 1787. They gave the book a new ending, a happy ending in hopes of stopping any further pain. In the new ending, a friend learns of his plans to hurt himself and stops him. The young man then learns how to become a part of society and goes on to live his life. The original copy of the book was banned. It is said if you read it, even today, you will be cursed and driven mad to the point of copying the steps of the young Werther. The new version of the book stopped the epidemic, and more books were given a happy ending to not cause such a disaster again.
Number 5. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is a coded book that was believed to have been written at some point in the early 15th century. It was discovered in a locked chest in Rome in the year 1912, and deciphering its history, and more importantly, its meaning, has been a goal of several different scholars for many years for and since. Its first known owner was believed to be Rudolph II. Rudolph apparently thought that the mysterious book had been written by Roger Bacon, and purchased the book for a huge amount of money, roughly 600 ducats of gold. The first 100% confirmed owner of the text was an alchemist named George Barish, who found the mysterious book in his personal library, unsure of its origin. It was passed from him to a variety of scholars, emperors, and officials, all of whom failed to decipher its bizarre text and illustrations. Several of the world's best cryptographers from the First and Second World War have tried to decipher its 240 pages and have not found any way to read the book. Some of the pictures include detailed sketches of plants that are not found in nature, zodiac signs. As you might expect, there are several theories about the purpose and the author of this book, with some believing that it was a herbology text written in a lost shorthand, and others having more outlandish theories that it was created by aliens from another world. One theory is that the book was written by either a demon or the devil himself, and that anyone who manages to translate its contents will unleash a curse upon the world. A theory they believe is bolstered by the fact that several people who have attempted a translation have gone on to suffer several years of bad fortune. Whether the origin of this book is human or demonic in nature, it is still the most mysterious and curiosity-inducing book in human history. Number 4. The Hanging Man Painting. This haunted painting is actually linked to a haunted photograph, making it twice as haunted as most of the items on this list. It all started when a photographer named James Kidd took a seemingly innocuous photo of a wooden cart next to a barn. Kidd thought nothing of it until he had the photo developed and saw a ghostly figure had made its way into the frame. On the left side of the cart, he could see a headless and hanging man. He showed the photos to others who searched for any sign of doctoring, but they could find none. It was then that this photo caught the attention of a painter named Laura P. Laura claims that she felt drawn to the image and decided that she had to make an oil painting based off of the photograph. While painting the picture, she reported feeling deeply uneasy, but she pushed through to finish her art. The painting was hung at a local business, but was soon taken down after it reportedly began moving on its own and caused several important papers to go missing. Laura then put the painting up in her own home, but soon began to experience strange occurrences. These included objects being knocked over or broken, mysterious knocking on the doors, strange leaks, and perhaps most disturbing, the apparition of the headless man in her home. Once word of the haunted painting got out, she received several offers from collectors to buy the painting, but she has so far refused, claiming that she is afraid of what the painting could do in the homes of others.
In at number 3 we have the Lesser Key of Solomon. The Lesser Key of Solomon is another book of spells. It is known as a cursed book of demonology. The author is unknown, as is usually the case with cursed books. Some say it is compiled from various texts gathering information from the most powerful spell books. It was first found in the 17th century. Since then, the book has been published and can even be found on Amazon. But think before you purchase. The book contains passages on how you could conjure the dead, demons, or lost spirits. Once summoned, it also tells how you can use these spirits for your own bidding. Ancient texts are often rumored to be cursed. The same can be said for this one, with tragedy and bad luck following the book. This book, unlike the other spellbooks, includes unique spells that others don't often mention. For example, it includes how to make yourself invisible or locate missing items. There are recipes for love potions and even liquors of persuasion. It seems there is nothing that you cannot achieve if you bought this book. This may be by design, promise those desperate for success or wanting something out of reach that they can have anything they want all for a price of a book. You should get lots of sales. But this is definitely not a book that you should want to own. It is apparently so cursed that it will doom anyone who has it on their bookshelf. There have been claims of various hauntings surrounding the books. The pages of the book reportedly turn on their own if the book is left idle. Others noted the book flying across the room. There are also more concerning hauntings. People have heard demonic whisperings around their home after buying the book, while also seeing shadow creatures in the corner of their eyes. The good news is there is a way to break the curse if you have already welcomed it into your home. It has been claimed that the way to dispose of the book is to burn it to ashes. Once you dispose of the ashes, you should be free of the curse, unless of course you used one of the spells wrong and something has backfired. In at number 2 we have the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript is known to be one of the most mysterious books in the world. It is unknown who the author was or when it may have been written. It is 240 pages long. It is written cryptically in an indecipherable language. It is also full of strange elaborate illustrations. The book is one of a kind. It has attracted many great minds over the years, all driven crazy after not being able to crack the code. The book is named after Wilfrid Voynich. He founded a secondhand store in London. He was travelling in Rome during 1921 looking for books for his store. During his trip he discovered the manuscript. He gave the manuscript his name due to its mystery. He realised he had stumbled upon something very, very special. The only indication of the book's past was a letter found along with the book. The letter stated it was written in 1665. It spoke about how the manuscript had once belonged to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, who reigned from 1576 to 1612, meaning it is at least 450 years old from what we know of. As most of the contents are unknown due to being unreadable, it is unclear exactly what the purpose of the book was. It is, however, believed that the book carries a curse of the old ones. This book may contain secrets of the ancient ones. This would explain why no one understands the language. It is an ancient dialect that no one alive today could comprehend. Some believe that if you did happen to crack the code, the curse would then be released. Even so, many have continued to try. Hopefully no one ever does. If you spoke the words out loud, it might release an evil onto the world we could never stop. And finally, in at number 1 we have the Necronomicon. The Necronomicon book is said to be bound in human flesh and inked in blood. It is a book of nightmares containing the darkest curses. Roughly translated, the title means an image of the law of the dead. It is said to even contain the power to resurrect the dead and summon ancient creatures. It is said that those who have read the book have turned insane or even died upon finishing the book. The story is that the book was written by Abdul al-Hazred and is over 1,000 pages long. Obviously it is the most haunted, cursed and doomed book in the world. It has even made appearances in various horror films including Evil Dead and Friday the 13th. Of course not a lot is known about the particular curses due to those who have read them no longer being around, but what we do know is that the original texts have the power to end humanity. If anyone was to survive the reading or survive performing one of the curses, they may summon one of the old ones. The old ones are the ancient creatures who ran the world before humanity, creatures like Cthulhu, who if awakened would destroy the earth before we could even think about stopping it. People who have been tempted to bring back their past loved ones have turned to the Necronomicon for answers, only to be driven mad the further into the book they read. The book does contain the power to bring back loved ones, but you would have to survive losing your own mind and soul along the way. Most copies of the book were destroyed for obvious reasons, but not all of the contents are lost forever. If you're brave enough to read any of the dark curses inside, there is a copy located in Massachusetts Miskatonic University. Just be careful what you read into, it could be the last thing you ever do.
Number 5. The Busby Stoop Chair. You know, when you think of a haunted object, I don't think your mind tends to go to a regular old armchair. Maybe dolls, gems, paintings, not to spoil the rest of the list, but I don't tend to think of home furnishings as being particularly cursed. Well then I guess it's because you haven't heard of the Busby Stoop Chair, that holds the bold distinction of being London's most haunted chair. Isn't that something to put on a resume? Thomas Busby was a common crook in the 17th century. He ran a counterfeit money operation with his father-in-law, but he was also known to be a general hoodlum, thief, brawler, and the kind of guy that would have rubbed elbows with Tom Shelby. It's said that a violent altercation with his father-in-law over a disagreement about their criminal enterprises led to Bubsy's associate dying by his hands. Busby was to be sent to the gallows, but had requested to visit his favorite pub one last time for a meal. He sat himself down in his favorite chair, ate his dinner, and claimed that if anyone ever sat in his chair after his death, he would make sure to haunt them. He would be hanged the next day. It would seem that his claim would prove to be true, because in the years since Busby's passing, the chair did bring mysterious misfortune. The first striking occurred in 1894, when a chimney sweep sat in the chair with a friend one evening and heard the story of the Busby haunting. He thought nothing of it, and after leaving the bar, passed out in the street. The next morning, he was found hanging from the gallows. During the Second World War, airmen used the pub as a hotspot, and the rumors began to sprout again about the Busby chair being haunted. An urban legend of an airman who sat in it and crashed his plane the next day was whispered in the wind amongst men. The owner of the pub, worried about the evil contained within a chair, rightfully so, eventually donated it to the Thirsk Museum in the UK, where it's hung 5 feet off the floor from the ceiling, just to ensure no one ever makes the mistake of trying to get too comfy in that cursed chair. And my ghouls and my goblins, if you'd like to hear more scary stuff, you don't have to go anywhere at all. Click through for hundreds of videos about cursed objects, aliens, cryptids, creatures, ghosts, ghouls, goblins, and way more. Stay subscribed and keep on creeping on. Number 4. Robert the Doll. Now, every good list of cursed objects should definitely include at least one cursed doll, I think, just for good measure. It's called Annabelle's Claws. Dolls are just inherently a little bit scary when they're not being used for make-believe or having tea parties, and they're especially scary when they carry a series of unfortunate urban legends with them, like the case of one Robert the Doll. Maybe you've even heard of Robert the Doll, as he's actually pretty famous as far as cursed dolls go out there. It's kind of Annabelle, Robert, the rest of them. Robert's been haunting for over a century. He used to be the property of one Robert Gein Otto. Now, although he shared a name with the doll, he preferred to be called Otto, maybe because the doll took it. Otto received Robert as a young boy from his grandfather, who obtained it through unknown means, as trying to trace it has been fruitless. No toy company has ever been found to have produced it. Otto loved Robert and had an active imagination to a degree that unsettled his parents. He would refer to the doll in first person and brought it everywhere with him, even dressed it in his clothing. That's kind of odd, but it's still little kid behavior. Otto would say he could hear Robert talk to him and would see him move. And children who passed the Otto estate when walking by would claim they saw Robert in the windows, watching them from up high, appearing and disappearing. Otto would blame all mishaps on Robert. Injuries, breaks around the house, accidents, anything that happened, it was because either Robert had told him to do it or Robert had done it. Kind of understandably, this behavior deeply worried Otto's parents. Otto kept Robert up until the day of his death in 1974, where he then traveled from home to home and collector to collector, causing a path of misfortune everywhere he went, until eventually getting himself incarcerated in the Key West Art and Historical Society, where he's now kept under a very tight lock and key and has become the museum's most popular attraction. Visitors even leave him offerings, little goodie bags, and even write letters asking for protection from him or a little aid cursing others. Employees of the museum say that sometimes they feel uncomfortable around him, and have noticed the chill in the air by his exhibit or electrical malfunctions near where he sits. It's been said that they need to stay on his good side lest they provoke his wrath. So I just want to throw this out there, Robert. I've always been a huge fan of all that you do, and that little sailor outfit is just chef's kiss. That looks great. Great on you. Matches your hair.
Number 3. The Manson Blood Painting. Charles Manson was the infamous cult leader who formed a group of mostly young women, teaching them that they were the reincarnations of the original Christians and that he was Jesus Christ. Manson began using his followers for extortion, taking a music teacher who they believed had inherited a large fortune hostage in his home and demanding that he join the cult and turn over the money. The man maintained that they were mistaken, and Manson attacked him with a sword before having one of his followers finish the job. In the cult's most famous incident, Manson sent 4 family members to the home of Hollywood actress Sharon Tate with instructions for them to end the lives of Tate and the 4 guests who were staying with her. The next night, these family members were joined by 3 others and brought by Manson to the home of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, where they broke in and tied up the 2 residents at Manson's instructions. He then ordered them to dispatch the victims and left. Although it hasn't been conclusively proven, the Manson family are believed to be responsible for at least 15 other deaths, with Manson himself claiming at one point that he was responsible for 35 total deaths. Manson was apprehended and remained in prison until his death in 2017. Even while in custody, he maintained a dedicated group of admirers, and after his death, his ashes were scattered at his funeral and an admiring artist gathered some of them up. The artist then used their own blood in order to paint a picture of the cult cult leader, using Manson's real ashes to fill in the eyes on the portrait. Zach Bagans purchased the painting and put it on display at his museum. When asked how he was sure that the ashes were authentic, he responded, "My people were there at the funeral, and my people saw what went down." Because of course they were. Number 2. The Devil's Rocking Chair. In 1981, a young boy in Brookfield, Connecticut named David Glatzel began having vivid night terrors. As time went on, these nightmares began infiltrating his everyday life, with him seeing haunting figures such as an old man with a white beard and a man with big black eyes and animalistic features and jagged teeth who would sit in an old rocking chair and watch the boy. He then began engaging in bizarre behavior like kicking, biting, seizures, and marks of strangulation appearing on him out of nowhere. His family reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they concluded that David was possessed by a demon. Priests performed 3 exorcisms on David, which supposedly caused him to levitate. In the chaos, the boyfriend of Debbie, David's older sister, Arnie Johnson, confronted the demon and told it to leave the child alone and to take him instead. David made a full recovery, but the demon decided to take Arnie up on his offer. A few months later, Arnie stabbed his landlord to death, and upon apprehension claimed that the devil made him do it. His trial marked the first time in history that someone entered a plea of not guilty for reasons of demonic possession, although this plea was rejected. This story was loosely adapted into the third Conjuring film, which follows Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement with the case. Lorraine Warren also claimed to have seen beasts sitting in the rocking chair, and not long after her death, Zach purchased the chair and put it on display. He released footage of the chair moving by itself and claims that the first night it was on display, guests began having vivid visions and passing out in front of the chair, and causing 5 of his tour guides to burst into tears. Bagan had to close the exhibit for a while, but the chair is back on display for guests to be terrified by. Number 1. Ed Gein's Cauldron. Ed Gein was a serial in Plainsfield, Wisconsin, living on the family property he had inherited until his crimes were discovered, the details of which captivated America due to their cruelty, violence, and disgustingness. Gein grew up with a brother, a frequently drunk father, and an overbearing religious fanatic of a mother. She was cruel and puritanical, constantly going on about the dangers of sin, carnal desire, and mocking and shaming her children, who rarely left the home for anything other than school. The family lived together until Ed's father died when Ed was 34. 4 years later, while burning brush with Ed, his brother Henry got caught in a blaze and died, leaving Ed alone with his mother. He took care of his mother, never dating or going out with friends, in order to appease her until she passed away, driving Ed off the deep end. People in Plainfield started going missing, with suspicion eventually leading the police to Gein's home. They discovered a variety of horrible sights, like a skin lampshade, skull soup bowls, and various masks and items of clothing that Gein had constructed from his victims, as well as bodies that he had stolen from the local cemetery. A couple months later, Gein's property was sold at auction, where a woman purchased an old cauldron, thinking that it would make a good planter for her flowers. Years later, the woman's granddaughter was talking with one of Gein's old neighbors who had been assisting the police with cleanup on the farm. He immediately recognized the cauldron as being the one he had seen years before, covered in dried blood and next to a vat of entrails. Ed Gein was of course the inspiration for classic horror movie characters like Norman Bates, Leatherface, and Buffalo Bill, but his real-life cauldron was put up for sale in an Ed Gein auction in 2015, where it was purchased by Zach Bagans, who put it on display at his museum.
Number 5. The Great Omar. The Great Omar was a one-of-a-kind, tailor-made collection of Omar Khayyam's poetry. So if you're looking to score this at your local Barnes & Noble, you might have a bit of trouble. It was commissioned by the owner of a British bookshop, whose sole request was that it would be the greatest modern binding in the world. You know, nothing too lofty though. The book itself is made of 5,000 pieces of leather, 1,000 different gemstones, 100 square feet of gold, and some pages too, I guess. I think there's poetry inside there. The final book was priced for roughly $150,000 after finishing, so it's a pretty expensive book. But what makes it so cursed? Well, when the Great Omar was purchased, it was bought by an American buyer and had to take a transatlantic trip on a little ship called the Titanic, a boat which, as far as I know, has never been involved in any sort of historical events of note whatsoever. The Great Omar was never recovered from the wreckage and sank with the ship. 10 weeks after the book kissed the ocean floor, the man who bound it, Francis Sangorski, drowned while on vacation at only the age of 37. A little suspicious, isn't it? A bookbinder in the 1930s tried to recreate the Great Omar, Stanley Bray. He finished the second iteration just in time for World War II to begin. The book was placed in a vault on London's Fore Street, which was one of the first sites to be bombed. I guess they heard about the book. The safe that held the book endured through the Blitz, but the safe's contents and the second Great Omar was incinerated and lost to the war. A third version has been crafted and is currently being held in a vault in the British Library, although given the book's history, I don't feel like I would be too comfortable spending any time around it if I didn't have to. Hey, liking what we do here at Top 5 Scary? Well, we always love a little subscribe. Toss one our way. Number 4, The Grand Grimoire. Another book you're probably gonna have some trouble finding on Amazon. The Grand Grimoire is a tome of black magic. No one can agree on when the grimoire was originally birthed into this world, with people claiming that it could have been written anywhere from the 15th century to the 19th century. No one knows who even wrote the Grand Grimoire. Perhaps it merely appeared one day from another world, tantalizing and asking to be read. Some urban legends claim that the book was written by a man possessed by the devil himself, acting as a vessel for his will to pen his musings. The book itself contains instructions for would-be warlocks to summon all manner of demons and sinister servants of the underworld, even including guides on how a fledgling necromancer could learn how to raise a spirit from the dead. Now, if all that sounds appealing to you, it's said that even so much as cracking the spine of the Grand Grimoire is enough to seal your soul to damnation, the literary equivalent of promising your soul to the underworld. The church, obviously, sought out to quell the rising threat of the Grand Grimoire's dark musings, and it is said that the original Grand Grimoire, gosh, that is fun to say, is currently being held sealed in the Vatican's legendary vault, where it shall never again be seen by prying eyes, or those wishing to uncover its many dark secrets. There are alleged excerpts that have been reprinted and made available, but the full Grand Grimoire itself hasn't been seen by anyone in what would be centuries. Perhaps for good reason too. I mean, if the myths and legends around the book are to be believed.
Number 3 on this list is the Book of Soyga. The Book of Soyga is one of the most intriguing books on this list. Humans like things that are hard to come by, things that are rare and often valuable to us. Diamonds are beautiful, but it's actually the rarity and difficulty in finding the diamonds that make them as valuable as they are. Well, the Book of Soyga took a book from those precious stones, and it's definitely hard to come by. The style inspiration says, dating back to the 16th century, the Book of Soyga, also known as the Aldaria, is a Latin essay about demonology with only 2 known copies in existence. One was owned by the scholar John Dee, and his elder brother devoted his entire life to decoding the Book of Soyga. Though he successfully determined that the book was full of dark rituals and incantations, he struggled to figure out the final 36 pages. His obsession with figuring out the content of those final pages drove Dee to insanity. Obsessed, he even hired a medium to summon the Archangel Uriel to help with the translation. Speaking through Dee's medium, Uriel apparently explains that the book came into existence when Adam ended paradise and that it could only be interpreted by Archangel Michael. After Dee's death, the book was thought long lost until 2 copies were found in 1994. Since then, many have been tempted to try and complete these works, but it comes with a serious risk. According to legend, anyone who successfully deciphers those final pages is destined to die in under 3 years. So dying in 3 years obviously isn't the best, but the good part about this is because it's so rare, it's pretty unlikely to stumble on this book and give it a read. This is like a legendary Pokemon of cursed books though, so if you do ever come across it, don't read it, but definitely scoop it up and put that thing on eBay. In that case, the Book of Soyga might actually be a blessing. Number 2 on this list is the Lesser Key of Solomon. This book is so cursed that it doesn't even need to be read to curse you. Literally just being in its proximity can do the trick. Slapped Ham writes, the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as the Clavica Solomon's Regis, is a cursed grimoire of demonology. Its original authors are unknown, and it's said to be comprised of texts compiled sometime in the 17th century. The book contains passages on how to conjure spirits of the dead and demons and how to control these entities to do your bidding. Curses and invocations also play a large role in the ancient text. Esoteric topics like how to become invisible and locate missing or stolen items are covered. Recipes for love potions and liquors of persuasion are also scattered throughout the book. This definitely isn't the book you want to own. It's reportedly so cursed that it will doom anyone who keeps a copy on their bookshelf. Those who've owned it have reported strange occurrences like pages turning on their own and books violently flying across the room. Strange whispers and shadow creatures have also been reported by owners of the manual. Owning the Lesser Key of Solomon is also believed to bring about catastrophic bad luck. It's said that the only way to break the book's curse is to burn the pages and properly dispose of the ashes. Finally, someone making some sense. How many times have I gone on this channel and talked about how we just need to start burning things? Cursed books, cursed houses, cursed objects. Screw all of it, let's just burn it. At the end of the day, this stuff is really cool, but I'm not out here trying to have my life ruined by some weird book. Burn it hot and let's be done with it. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Codex Gigas. Codex Gigas is one of the closest things that we have to a Bible for the devil. And anything that carries a weight to it like that needs to be on this list. The Style Inspiration says, at 92 centimeters, the Codex Gigas is the largest extant medieval illuminated manuscript in the world. Just like everything evil, it comes with 2 names, and the Codex Gigas' second name is more than a little foreboding: the Devil's Bible. The history of the book is heavy to say the least. It was written by a monk who had broken his spiritual vows, and for his crime, the monk was sentenced to die entombed behind a brick wall. The night before his death, the monk began chronicling everything he knew about the human experience in a book. So, the story goes, realizing he wouldn't have time to finish it, he apparently summoned Lucifer and asked him to complete the project in exchange for his soul. The book was then allegedly completed by the devil himself. It's overflowing with dark rituals and imagery, and even includes 19-inch drawings of the devil and other demonic entities. Now, obviously, because this was written by the devil, there are some side effects from reading the thing. People have reported watching their friends become possessed as they read it. Now, it's currently on display for people to go take a look at the National Library of Sweden. But be very careful if you ever do go take a look, because clearly, this is the work of the devil.
In at number 5, we have The Orphan Story. The Orphan Story was published in 2018. However, the writing of this novel was started 400 years earlier by Martin de Leon Cardenas. Martin was not just any writer, he was a monk who broke his sacred vow. He wrote the majority of the novel between 1608 and 1615. There is a rumor of a curse surrounding the novel. The reason the book was not published until 2018 was due to everyone involved in the book mysteriously dying. The curse is rumored to have been attached to the book when the monk broke his sacred vow. He was the first to die before he could finish writing the story. It was Belinda Palacios who rediscovered the manuscript hidden in the archives of the Hispanic Society of America in 1965. She was determined to finish the book and have it published, but was deterred by her colleagues warning her about the curse. The book then went back into the archives. Others attempted to publish the book on several occasions. The publication fell through each time because those involved kept dying suddenly under mysterious circumstances. The deaths were caused by sudden traumatic events, horrific car accidents, sudden and unexplained illnesses. It finally took 400 years for someone to be brave enough to publish the book. Even now, after being published, it is believed the curse is still contained within the story. The difference being now it has been duplicated and sent all over the world, making the curse stronger and having many more victims than it can claim. The origin of the curse contained in the book is unknown, however it is thought to be millions of years old. Formed over the worship of ancient religions, when the monk broke his vow, he unknowingly released the curse. It then latched onto the pages of the manuscript, taking anyone who dared to be involved with it. In at number 4, we have Untitled Book of Spells. This untitled spellbook was first known by the public in 2013. 2 books were listed for sale online. The online seller was selling 2 mysterious handwritten and spiral-bound spellbooks. The books were sold for a crazy $13,865. Once sold, the seller sent a warning to the buyers saying, "To those not of the craft, the reading of this book is forbidden. Proceed no further, or justice will exact a swift and terrible retribution, and you will surely suffer at the hand of the craft." The warning means that if you do not study witchcraft and you attempt to study or perform anything within the book, you will be cursed and will suffer. These spells were believed to have been written by a high priestess of Wiccan named Persephone Adrasta Irene sometime in the early 1960s. It is believed that she ran her own coven, keeping to herself in an area that others avoided. It is believed that spellbooks should always be burned after the witch who wrote them dies. The spells should not be used by anyone if not under the witch's supervision. The two books are believed to be reworkings of the original work by someone in the coven. They did not want the work to be lost, so they reworked and created two copies of the spells. This is not something that should ever be done. They each contain vast collections of incantations, curses, spells, and enchantments. There are instructions on how to summon spirits, demons, and other worldly entities, as well as instructions on exorcism in case something goes wrong during another spell. It is not currently known where the book is or if the buyer is alive or dead. Hopefully they are worthy to study the pieces, otherwise they may have cursed themselves.
Number 3 on this list is the Ars Notoria. The Ars Notoria is an ancient text which grants the person who studies it a perfect memory. Something that sounds great from the outside, but it isn't as cool as it's cracked up to be. Ancient Origins writes, as part of a larger collection known as the Lesser Keys of Solomon, the Ars Notoria is a book that is said to allow followers a mastery of academia, giving them greater eloquence, a perfect memory, and wisdom. The Ars Notoria is one of 5 books within the Lesser Keys of Solomon, an anonymous text that was compiled from other works in the 17th century and focuses on demonology. The Ars Notoria is the oldest portion of the Lesser of the Keys grimoire, dating back to the 13th century. However, the text contained within are a collection of orations, prayers, and magical words which date back to well before the 1200s. The prayers are in several languages including Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. It was not a book of spells or potions, but a book of prayers and orations that are said to strengthen and focus one's mental powers by beseeching God for intellectual gifts. Among these intellectual gifts is the concept of a perfect memory. Those who practice liberal arts such as arithmetic, geometry, and philosophy are promised a mastery of their subject if they devote themselves to the Ars Notoria. Within, it describes a daily process of visualization, contemplation, and orations intended to enhance the practitioner's focus and memory. So here's the thing, guys, that all sounds well and good and very useful, but I don't think that people understand what a perfect memory actually means. It means that there is literally nothing at any given point that you will ever forget. The license plate of that one car that cut you off, that one passing comment that the cashier said about the milk that you bought, the strange handshake that you had with your friend the other day. Literally nothing at all. You're not going to forget anything. Think about how much noise is going to be going on in your head at one given time if you can't forget anything. This is the curse of this book, and it's why a lot of people who have studied it in depth have lost their minds. If you're going to remember everything in the world, then there also needs to be a way to turn it off every now and again, to finally get some silence in your head. Sometimes forgetting things really is the best thing for us. Number 2 on this list is the Picatrix. The Picatrix is definitely a book that should be avoided, and it's mainly for how freaking grotesque it is. It was initially written in Arabic back in the 11th century, and it's a book that's centered around astrology and magic. It teaches the individuals who study it how to concoct crazy spells and make magical potions. What has thrust it into the limelight, as I mentioned earlier, is how freaking gross it is. The magical potions and the spells in here are just disgusting, and they're honestly plain wrong. Various body parts, various fluid from said body parts, and other weird stuff is regularly called upon in this text. The following is a literal passage from the book on how to make a spell. Take 4 ounces of the blood of a black dog, 2 ounces each of pig's blood and brains, and 1 ounce of donkey brains. Mix all of this together until well blended. When you give this medicine to someone in food or drink, he will hate you. And like, yeah, duh, if anyone blended up a bunch of brains and then gave it to me to drink, then I would kind of hate them as well. Many people think that this book is cursed based on the horrible spells in it, but it honestly might not be and could just be super weird. Either way, probably best to be avoided. And number 1 on this list is the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript is an illustrated codex that is handwritten in a writing system or language that no one understands. By using some advanced carbon dating, we can determine that it was made back in the early 15th century. We're pretty sure that based on the style of writing, artwork, and language that's in this book, it was most likely made in Italy. The manuscript contains 240 pages in it, and even though it was discovered a long time ago, no one has any idea what it truly means. This could be a good thing though, because the current prevailing wisdom is that whoever discovered exactly what this book says and means, they're gonna be cursed. Some think that this book has an ancient alien curse that's attached to it, and that it was dumped in Italy hundreds of years ago by said extraterrestrials. Others believe that there were some deep devil worshippers who made this book after finally making contact with the devil. Either way, so far we have no idea what it says, and if things maintain how they've been, we probably won't ever know. Which for a book like the Voynich manuscript, might actually be for the best.
In at number 5 we have Tamino's Hell. Okay, so this one is a poem rather than a full book, but it still holds an ancient curse that it is worth sending a warning about. It was written by Japanese writer Seijo Yaso. Not much is known about the writer. He published the poem in 1919 in his 27th collection of poetry. Seijo lost his sister and his father during World War I. It is said since that happened, he was in a constant state of suffering and grief. Since the poem gained its reputation for the curse, many have given their opinion how the book became such a danger. Many believe that Seijo was vulnerable to demons while he was in his suffering state, that he might have been persuaded to do their bidding to ease his pain. He allowed them to curse the poem in such a way that when it was read out loud, it would cause those who heard it to suffer. It is unknown if Seijo was aware of the consequences of his actions when he published the work. The work itself seems to almost confirm this, as it follows a young boy who has suffered loss in his descent into hell. When the poem was released, there quickly came reports of sudden passings. One woman is said to have died moments after reading the poem out loud. Others have complained of chest pains, sharp pains in their brain, along with many other severe symptoms. Many people got sick and others passed away suddenly from illness or bizarre accidents. The one passing that was most famous was that of Japanese filmmaker Terayama Shuji. Shuji made a film based on the poem in 1974. The film was believed to have been cursed by the poem when Shuji passed away suddenly shortly after it was released. The book has since become a terrifying legend, and those who know of it try to avoid it at all costs. In 2004, the writer Inu Haiko published a book based on the poem. This brought the poem to a new audience. Since then, more people have found the poem online to test if the rumors are true. Those people reported weird occurrences and horrific accidents after they read it. In at number 4, the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. The Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage is a book of mystic arts written by Abraham for his son Lamech. It was a 3-part 15th century book. It was translated in the 1900s. Once translated, it developed a reputation for being cursed. Abraham wrote his book based on the idea that every person has their own unique personal demon. The book contains rituals to help the reader summon and control their demon. It is told that once you could do this, you could perform supernatural feats. It is said that if you own this book, you will also get the attached curse. Anyone with a copy in their possession will be haunted by spirits from another realm. People unlucky enough to own the book have had bad luck follow them, and some even met an early demise. It is said that the incantations that give you the ability to control your demon releases the curse and opens you up to demons from the other side. Fun stuff.
Number 3, The Crying Boy. I love a good haunted painting. Maybe it was just because I had an odd fondness for Ghostbusters 2 as a kid, and a haunted painting centered pretty prominently in that. Maybe it's just because I'm enticed by the uncanny valley. I love a pair of eyes that you can look at but can never look at you back. Case in point. Take a look at this painting, The Crying Boy. Looks like a fairly innocuous painting, right? Wouldn't look too out of place in your dentist's office. It's not really my scene, but I'm sure a generation of grannies have loved to put this above the fireplace. It's also been the center of a series of strange coincidences that are just too odd to be true. It was painted by an Italian painter, one Giovanni Bergolin, and mass-produced as a print across the 1950s, so everyone could enjoy hanging this sad crying boy in the comfort of their own home. Wow, that sentence out of context is crazy. Now, they would enjoy this painting in the comfort of their home until it would burn down, because for some bizarre otherworldly reason, firefighters around Essex, London would report that frequently, amidst smoldering ruins of a burned down house, repeatedly they would find the crying boy print completely untouched by the flames, even when everything else had burned to ash. Now, once is bizarre. 2 times, that's pretty strange. But this happens 3 times, pick up the phone and call the Ghostbusters because you've got an outright paranormal mystery on your hands. The British tabloid The Sun loved the story and was spreading stories of the cursed paintings like a house on fire. Ooh, too soon? The Sun printed out warnings of people who owned the painting, telling them that they should get rid of it, lest they start to find themselves smelling smoke. The story was so popular, and people were so invested in the curse of the crying boy, that the Sun tried to take it upon themselves to rid London of the curse by holding a bonfire in which anyone who owned a print of the cursed painting could come, torch it, and hopefully exorcise whatever demons got into the printing press. The bonfire was a raging success, with sackfuls of the prints being torched, seemingly ending the curse of the crying boy. Does anyone else kind of want one of the prints though? I don't know, I think there's something about it. I think it would tie the living room together. Number 2, ballista balls. You know, the last couple years, I think, had all of us acting pretty strange. You know, maybe you got through it by binging all of Tiger King in a day. Maybe you got really into making a sourdough. Maybe you returned a cursed artifact you stole when you were a teenager. We all went through a strange period. In 2020, an anonymous source returned an ancient artifact that they'd stolen as a teenager to the Israeli government. A Bronze Age ballista ball fired during the Great Jewish Revolt by the Romans. The thief swiped them as a teenager when visiting with a group of friends, and had went on to live a fairly normal life. Had a nice career, found a partner, sired some children, but he had said that throughout his entire life he felt as if there was a weight over him, as if he had some invisible presence crushing down on him. He said no matter how long it had been or how much his life had moved past this one act of delinquency, his heart could never move from it, and he felt as if he had been cursed to forever bear its guilt. During the event of the last few years, he said it stirred in him this apocalyptic feeling that made him feel like he had to return the ballista balls in hopes of finally clearing his consciousness. I hope he didn't think he did all that. Through Facebook, he ended up getting put towards the right channels to return it. But you know what's kind of bizarre? This isn't even the first time that someone's returned a pair of cursed ballista balls, because in 2015, an almost identical story played out. In 2015, 2 ballista balls were returned to the Israeli authorities anonymously alongside a note saying, "I took these in 1995 from a residential quarter at the foot of the summit. They have brought me nothing but trouble. Please do not steal antiquities." Well, I've got to say it's a nice change of pace to hear about people trying to undo the curse before things got too irrevocable. And a pretty simple, easy follow message for you kids at home. Don't steal antiquities. Unless you're Indiana Jones, that should be fairly easy for all of us to follow. And finally, number 1, the Black Prince's Ruby. The Black Prince's Ruby was once thought to be the biggest ruby in the world. Unfortunately though, upon closer inspection, this mighty ruby turned out to be an imposter. A spinel disguised as a ruby, a mineral known as the Great Imposter. Perhaps then that it's fitting that this accursed gemstone's legacy began with a story of deceit. Prior to being the crowning jewel in the imperial state crown of the UK, the Black Prince's Ruby first appeared in the 14th century, where it was owned by Abu Sa'id, who was the last Sultan of Granada. Little history lesson for you, so don't fall asleep too much. In the late 13th century, Granada was losing a war to King Pedro the Cruel, who historically was not known to be nice, you know, given the title. The Christian kingdom of Castilla was taking more and more of Said's territory, and so to arrange a peaceful end to the war, the Sultan had requested an audience with King Pedro in Castilla and arranged a meeting, and they came to an agreement and the Sultan was welcomed. When the Sultan and his arriving party thought they were welcomed as guests, they were surprised to see King Pedro welcome them with drawn swords. He was King Pedro the Cruel, after all. I don't need to tell you what happened next, but King Pedro stripped the jewel off of the Sultan's corpse. Soon after, King Pedro found himself in a new war against his brother Henry of Trastamara for Castilla's throne. King Pedro commissioned the Black Prince Edward of England for aid, and as payment for his services, gave him the ruby, where it would get its name, the Black Prince's Ruby. Edward would return home to England, but Pedro would fall in battle to his brother. Edward the Black Prince would die slowly and painfully from a disease before he could inherit the throne, giving the ruby to his son Richard II. Richard would become king, but he was taken out by Henry IV, who took the ruby as well, who then passed from a slow illness, giving the ruby to his son Henry V. This is the worst thing to re-gift possible. It would pass from a lineage of kings until eventually finding its way to the Tudors, and then eventually after that, finding a permanent home in the London Tower, amidst the crown jewel collection, where it's been sealed away, never to be claimed again, because just look at the history of this thing. This is not something you ever want to unwrap. Whew!
Coming in at number 5, we have Codex Gigas. The Codex Gigas is also known as the Devil's Bible. It was written in the 16th century by a monk. It has been told that the monk had broken his vow. He was then put on trial for breaking his vow. This is not something that was taken lightly. After a short trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to execution. He had a couple of days left. With the little time that he had left, he wanted to write everything he knew about the human experience. He wanted there to be something left of him after he passed on. He was writing as much as he could for as long as he could. He knew they would come to take him soon. With the little time that he had left, he decided that he would summon the devil. He wanted to make a deal with the devil. He promised him his soul if Lucifer would finish writing the book that he had started. Once he was taken away, the devil did just that. The book was completed by the devil himself. It is said to be overflowing in dark imagery. The book contains rituals that you can perform to contact the devil yourself. It also includes sketches of the devil and other demonic beings. The devil used the book to hold dark, ancient curses. As an evil being, he wanted anyone who came into contact with the book in their life to be cursed. He wanted to take more souls as he did the old monk. It is said the soul of the monk is bound to the book by the devil, as those who touch it may see or hear the monk's warning to save their souls. Coming in number 4, we have the Book of Soyga. The Book of Soyga is also known as the Book of Death. There have only ever been 2 copies known in existence. The book has been written in an unknown language. There has never been anyone who have been able to identify the language. It is also not known who's written the book. There was a lot of mystery around the text. A scholar named John Dee found the book. He wanted to attempt to decode the book. He became obsessed with the book. He started to fall into insanity. John started to no longer resemble himself. His professional work was not the same, and he was consumed by the obsession of the writing. After his death in 1608, the book was lost. It was not discovered again until 1994. Since the book was resurfaced, many have tried to decode the book. Anyone attempting to decode the book have had to deal with some serious consequences. According to the legend, anyone who does successfully decode the book will pass away within the next 3 years. It's rumored this may have been what happened to John Dee. Decoding the book might have driven him crazy and the curse took his life. He might have hidden the book so that for all those years it would not hurt anyone else or drive anyone insane. Both copies have now been found. They have been secured and can be found in London. One is kept at the British Library and the other is at the Bodleian Library. They are locked away safe so that no one can attempt to read the horrors contained within the text.
Number 3. The Book of Abramelin. The Book of Abramelin, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sure one of you ghouls and goblins will let me know, or the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, if you're not into that whole brevity thing, is an allegedly magic text that is thought to have been written at some point during the 14th century. It wasn't until the 19th century that it became recognized for its power, when the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn translated the book into English in the late 1890s. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and you're wondering which Final Fantasy that's from, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was a secret society devoted to the study of the occult and spiritual development. From here, the book became a key text in occultism, supposedly even inspiring Aleister Crowley's system of magic. So what's inside the book? Any pop-ups? The book centers around an incredibly elaborate ritual aimed at allowing a practicing sorcerer to communicate with their holy guardian angel. The book theorizing that everyone has their own personal guardian angel, a celestial other half from another world, if you will. After the sorcerer summons their guardian angel and enjoys a honeymoon phase, the book describes a period of blissful intimacy, one needs to conquer every unredeemed spirit of the infernal regions, which sounds like a bit of a task. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of unredeemed spirit. Luckily, I think the angel helps out a bit. If the legends are true, then undoubtedly the information in this book isn't the kind of thing that should ever be falling into the wrong hands. I mean, that's just a general good piece of life advice. As a general rule of thumb, you shouldn't mess with demons unless you know what you're doing, okay? That's the kind of thing to leave up to professionals. For all of our sakes, you know? Number 2. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is one of the more interesting books on this list. It's named after the first public owner of it, Wilfrid Voynich. Unlike most of these cursed banned books, the Voynich Manuscript is actually something you can seek out and read via Yale University's online collection, and you are more than welcome to peer over its pages, although you might find it a bit of a difficult text to read, because the Voynich manuscript is written in a language that no human being speaks or has ever spoken. Carbon dating suggests the manuscript was first written at some unspecified time during the 14th century, and all 240 of the manuscript's pages are written completely unintelligibly, so if you want to take a look at this thing and try and help us crack this, please be my guest. Adorning its pages are confusing illustrations that only serve to further its mysterious reputation, with most of the drawings looking like a cross between a Hieronymus Bosch painting and a fever dream kaleidoscope nightmare. The book has made its way through countless owners, a succession of kings and other powerful leaders, and yet in all the years of its existence, no one has even come remotely close to understanding just what the Voynich manuscript is, where it came from, and what its purpose is. Is it cursed? Well, it's possible. Maybe it contains the instructions for all manner of demonic and occult magic, and we just don't know how to read it yet. There are some people who believe that the Voynich manuscript could have been written by an extraterrestrial entity and gifted to us. And there's even some legends that claim the manuscript has some sort of apocalyptic curse hidden inside its mysterious scrawlings. We might never know, unless you might be the one to crack it for us. Number 1. Codex Gigas. Codex Gigas? Gigas? One of you guys will tell me, I'm sure. Oft referred to as the Devil's Bible, is the biggest entry on this list. And not just for its renown. No, it's like literally the biggest entry on this list. It's 3 feet tall and weighs around 80 pounds. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the curse this book inflicts on you is a hernia. The Codex Gigas, which literally translates to giant book, is a medieval manuscript dating back to the 12th century. So what's the deal with the Codex Gigas? Well, legends tell the Codex was penned by a monk who had broken his vows, and to repent for his sins, he was sentenced to be walled up alive. He promised, as an apology, that he would write a powerful book to glorify the monastery, and his book would contain all known human knowledge at that point. Everything. The original Wikipedia, and he wasn't even asking for donations. The legend continues that the monk, realizing that this task was a bit lofty, even for the quickest of scribes, reached out for some help co-authoring his mighty manuscript. He reached out and prayed, but not from God, but instead from Lucifer, asking for help finishing the book in exchange for his eternal soul. I'm starting to understand why he was sentenced for breaking his vows. Not really the best plan if you're looking to redeem yourself in the eyes of the church by making a deal with the devil, but hey, we've all done pretty crazy things trying to make a deadline, I totally get it. It's said that Lucifer himself helped complete the book, and the monk drew a portrait of the devil himself as thanks. That's where the book gets its name, the Devil's Bible. The book is replete with occultism, dark rituals, and imagery. I mean, after all, it's said to contain the entirety of the knowledge of the human race up to this point. So who's to speak what sort of sinister secrets are kept between its giant pages? There were estimates and tests to try and recreate the manuscript, suggesting that even one man writing, without illustrations, would have taken the better part of 2 decades to write the calligraphy present inside that book. So did this monk have some otherworldly help? Maybe just a huge stack of Red Bull? And what is inside this book? If your Latin's any good, the manuscript is kept on display in the National Library of Stockholm. Just be careful what you read. You got no idea what you could bring into this world.